we didn't have enough to give everybody a ticket, so obviously we had to be quite careful and cautious about, and it was quite hard, cruel in assessing people's need, you know. Do you really need it? Kind of slowly asking them how much money they had, and only the people who kind of really, you know, were really distraught, or families, so that they wouldn't have to queue in the crush, we'd give tickets. But yeah, people were of course very grateful. A lot of people were really like, yes, you know, some people got upset and cried and kind of were very thankful, and some people were also there was a real tension. They didn't want to accept charity. I mean, it's not one of the kind of things that it's of course obvious when you think about it, but these weren't people who were like used to this kind of situation. They were people, you know, very proud, kind of dignified, not wanting to accept charity, saying like, no, you know, I'm trying to arrange something for a Western Union transfer. I don't want the money, but if you can come and show a passport, you know, they'd much rather assistance like that, and that they would use their own. But people were very grateful. Yeah, people were really grateful. Our basic day would be, I guess counterintuitively, you start and at that kind of 11 o'clock midnight when people start to arrive. It's welcoming people in, trying to like calm their nerves because they're really nervous. It's a new place, explaining to them that it's okay, you know, you're safe here, the police won't get you. There's water and food, there's blankets, find somewhere to sleep, and then explaining the process for how they were going to have to travel the next day. And reassuring people. A lot of it was reassuring. People were really scared. They'd heard horror stories. In Hungary it was happening as well. People were being collected up by the government, promised that they were being taken to Germany, tricked into buses, taken to detention centres where they were being processed and fingerprinted with no food, with no water, with no medical support. So people were really, really nervous to accept any step, which meant that the kind of speaking a bit of Arabic or speaking a bit of Farsi was a massive reassurance to people, especially having students there from the Middle East and North Africa who could kind of reassure and explain. So yeah, that was the beginning of the day, that kind of night shift. And then from 4 o'clock when the gates opened, it was a like mix of crowd control, which was really stressful when, you know, 4,000 people, crying children, really trying to kind of push to get onto trains, and it was a mix of reassuring people and calming the police down, so the police would let us do it. Because when the police got frustrated, they'd tell us to fuck off, and they'd come in and they'd be swinging batons, and they'd shut gates, and they'd be kind of pushing people through and telling other people to sit and wait, and with no linguistic connection, with no ability to communicate with people, because they spoke Hungarian, because it was Hungary. And that would run till, on the first few days before we set the queuing system up, that could run to like 2, 3, 4 in the afternoon. People standing all that time from 4 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon, crushing, kind of trains leaving empty. When we'd set the queuing system up and worked it out with the separate family queue, that would be from like 4 till 11, 12 maybe, and we'd get everybody out. And then at 12 we'd go around and collect back in the blankets that people had left for us and the mats, and kind of clean them off, set them up in piles for like that's exactly the same thing to happen. And then in the afternoon was when you could like snatch a few hours sleep. And there was a mix of other volunteers and students in Budapest. You go and crash on their sofa for a few hours. I slept in the station a couple of nights, just kind of making friends. There was a real solidarity with the other volunteers there. But yeah, it was quite sad seeing all these volunteers being there and not being able to stop kind of sacrificing their health, their time, their money, because the kind of immediacy of the needs was so salient and so apparent. That you couldn't just like clock off and go to bed, or like go down the street and buy yourself a meal. You kind of were like running on adrenaline and snatching a bit of bread and cheese when you could, and keeping on going, which was unsustainable. You know, we kind of burnt out. A lot of people burnt out. A lot of people got really traumatised. But then on the 14th, no one came. Like 200-300 people came. And so the government had, although they had closed this one border crossing point, they'd clearly got a lot stricter on the rest. They built a 2-metre high barbed wire fence. And so that was, on one hand, it was just very eerie, because we knew that it wasn't that the flow had stopped all the way back to Syria, we just that people were getting stopped somewhere else. And that was a really horrible day. And so we kind of waited, and sure enough, no one came later into the night. And so the next day we collected a load of the blankets and the water and drove down to the Serbian border and spent a couple of days there. And again, the Hungarian government was being really petty about letting people cross the border if they had supplies, and just trying to kind of stop the provision as much as they could. But we kind of drove to another border crossing because all the volunteers were in touch with kind of where you could get through. And it was really tragic. I mean, I was only there for 2 days because I had a ticket that I had to get back on. But just getting to the Serbian border, and it was as rudimentary as people coming to this barrier and you having to say, you know, here's some support we can give you for tonight. You can go walk that way and you'll get to Romania, or you can go that way and you'll get to Croatia. One of the things that characterised it, like, I guess a theme from lots of the stories that was really surprising for me was people's like jovialness. People telling, like, smiling and laughing about stories of, like, you know, getting the boat from Turkey and then the motor didn't work again, you know, and like we nearly, but it was okay because we got drifted back to shore, just kind of telling it as like this kind of funny anecdote. And then sometimes slipping in, oh yeah, no, one kid died on that trip, you know, and then, oh no, you know. There was a really sad story of, I didn't get it in Arabic, but there was a kid with a gunshot wound in his hand, and they were saying that the state authorities in Serbia had shot him. And there was a guy, I mean, so many of the stories were kind of people's, yeah, just people making light of like really grim parts of the journey. One of the other really impressive things was seeing so many people who you just assumed would be family because they kind of paired up into different groups, most of whom had just met on the route. There was one guy who we met who we were trying to stop the train because he was running, he was carrying a guy who had crutches in his hands, and they got on board. And they looked quite similar, and one of the other volunteers asked if they were brothers. They go, no, we met in Turkey. And he's like, oh wow, and you stayed together? And he goes, yeah, you know, he can't walk. And it wasn't that he could hop on his crutches, he couldn't move, he could only stand still, and if he wanted to move, he had to be carried. So this guy fucking carried him from Turkey. Whenever they had to make a walking distance, he'd carried this guy from like waiting point to waiting point, he'd have a rest, and he meant that he kind of lost his other friends because he'd been so much slower. He'd fucking carried this guy from Turkey all the way to Austria. Yeah, there were lots of stories. It's weird to kind of bring them up. It was definitely, I mean, I was definitely affected when I was there because it's like, not just the stories, but a combination of not sleeping, not eating, like running on adrenaline, and then just like hearing all this shit and seeing so much pain was like a bit much. And I was only there for 11 days in the kind of comfort of Budapest in a train station. I can't imagine what it was like further down the line and kind of all the way back into Syria.